Welcome to Gradcast, the official podcast of the Society of Graduate Students at the University of Western Ontario.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Gradcast, the official podcast of the Society of Graduate Students.
Radio show,
the official radio show and podcast of the Society of Graduate Students here at the University of Western Ontario. I'll be your host for today, Tyson Davis, and I'm joined by
Eric Green.
And today we're here with Dominik, and I'm sorry I forgot the pronunciation of your last name. Svehla. And you're in public history, right?
I am indeed.
Okay, so why don't you tell us a little bit about the program and what you do?
Yeah, so the program this year is 14 people. It's usually, around a dozen people, and it's mainly a very interactive program based in what we like to call, obviously, public history, which is a stream of history that mainly deals with, obviously, making history more accessible to the public. So very often you'll see us in positions such as curators, collection managers, archivists, historical land assessment, that type of thing, even government jobs very often. So this year, for example, a lot of the projects we do are very based in a lot of hands-on experience. So, for example, in the beginning of the year, we did a built heritage project. So every one of us was assigned a house in London, and we had to do a full-blown research segment on it. Basically, who lived there, what was their profession, who built the house, does it have any architectural significance to it? If it's a style, a mixed style, does it really suit well to the neighborhood, that type of thing. And then we got to present in front of a city, kind of a city council on the matter, and basically our assessments were taken into account when they make the final judgment whether the house should be turned into a heritage home or not.
Awesome. So what specifically are you guys researching this term for your dissertation, sorry?
Yeah, so this year, all 14 of us, it's a very collaborative project. We took about 500 letters from assessment, that type of thing, even government jobs very often. So this year, for example, a lot of the projects we do are very based in a lot of hands-on experience. So, for example, in the beginning of the year, we did a built heritage project. So every one of us was assigned a house in London, and we had to do a full-blown research segment on it. Basically, who lived there, what was their profession, who built the house, does it have any architectural significance to it? If it's a style, a mixed style, does it really suit well to the neighborhood, that type of thing. And then we got to present in front of a city, kind of a city council on the matter, and basically our assessments were taken into account when they make the final judgment whether the house should be turned into a heritage home or not.
Awesome. So what specifically are you guys researching this term for your dissertation, sorry? Yeah,
so this year, all 14 of us, it's a very collaborative project. We took about 500 letters from a pretty prominent family in London called the Leonard family. These 500 letters come from between 1914 and 1918, so obviously during World War I. Two of the sons of this family, the Leonard family, fought in France, and obviously there's a lot of correspondence between them and their families back home. So we took these 500 letters, approximately a couple thousand pages worth of text, transcribed them all. It took us a lot of manpower, just to kind of get through it. A lot of them were very interesting, but some of them were quite repetitive. And at the end of it, we are basically publishing a book. So the book is called This Hour of Trial and Sorrow. And so out of the thousands of pages we have of transcribed text, we're basically selecting the best and most evocative 200 or so pages, publishing it in a book, along with 4 essays that we've prepared. An essay on the Leonard family itself, so who are they and why they're important. An essay on London during the war, so what it looked like here during the war and what London citizens were doing to obviously help the war effort. An essay on the war overseas, so why did the war start in the first place, and how did the Leonard brothers find themselves there, as well as a kind of a segment on letter correspondence, so how the letters were written, especially in terms of how the letters were sent back, and with a lot of censorship, so obviously places and names are very often cut out by the censors themselves, and a final essay on returning home, so what London looked like with all the soldiers returning home.
That's awesome. So, not to try to spoil anything from the book itself, but what prominence does this family hold in London?
The family used to own a giant foundry here in London, so they made basically kind of engines, steamers, and boilers and that type of thing. London wasn't actually their only location. They had a bunch of locations across Canada, including St. John's. I think they had one in Calgary and way in BC as well, I think in Montreal as well. Very prominent and wealthy family. Their lineage kind of spans all the way back to the 17th century England. I think they even have, royal ties. as during the war, for example, the family made shells. So they made shells, obviously, for the war effort. Got quite a bit of wealth from that. But other than that, yeah, it's just mainly big business in London. So.
Okay, well, I'm just going to take it back a little bit here, Dominik. And I know you did your BA, and your major was in history, and your minor was in classical studies.
Yep.
So I'm just curious, where throughout the course of those years doing your bachelor's did you decide you wanted to go into public history as opposed to more, standard history?
Yeah, it was actually quite a while before that. When I was in high school, my BA was just a way to get into the the master's public history program, because there really isn't a BA in public history anywhere. So my interest kind of, the peak of it was when I was about grade 11. I had went to the ROM as a part of a school trip, and we got to go behind the scenes and see a lot of the collections and stuff like that. And there was a special that time on the samurais of feudal Japan, and we got to handle a lot of the swords and the armor and stuff like that. And I think that really piqued my interest, and I thought, well, I think I could do this as a profession. I think this would really interest me, as dealing with the physical portions of history. Yeah.
Yeah, it does seem like it's definitely a lot more hands-on than just the theoretical writing of papers and stuff like that. So just out of curiosity, what's your favorite part of history? What's your favorite area of study?
Oh, my favorite era is probably the classical era. So Romans, Greeks, that type of thing. It's part of the reason why when I started at Western, I was a double major in poli-sci and history. And about my second year, I decided poli-sci really wasn't for me, so I switched to a minor in classics. I didn't have enough time to do a major in classics, and part of doing a major in classics also entails taking Latin and ancient Greek, which I really didn't have time for, especially for another 2 years. Just wouldn't be time for that, so I just decided for a minor instead. Yeah.
Man, you shout out to my alma mater, because my undergrad actually does do a BA in public history.
Oh, really?
Over at Bishop's in Quebec.
Oh, okay, cool.
But yeah, it's out there, man.
Yeah.
Public history is becoming a thing.
Well,
Sorry,
good.
Go ahead, Eric.
So, to bring it back to the book,
Yeah,
what
absolutely.
publisher picked you guys up? Just out of curiosity.
Just through Western. At the beginning of the year, our awesome supervisor, Michelle Hamilton, she always basically picks what project we're going to be doing. So last year, for example, they worked closely with Fanshawe Pioneer Village, and they put together a display for a rural doctor from kind of the turn of the century. And so, Fanshawe Pioneer Village, they all have all the kind of the historic houses. One of the houses was the house for Dr. Jones, and so they put up a display there. And so this year it just happened that the professor chose to look at these letters, and the school funded it, and that's where we are.
Awesome. So, are all 12 of you involved in the essays?
Yeah, there's 14 of us actually this year.
Oh, sorry.
And yeah, all 14 of us are involved in it. We're divided into 4 groups. Some groups have 3, some groups have 4. And that's how we actually wrote the essays. There's 4 essays. We each wrote an essay on the different topics. But as a whole, it's obviously a collaborative project. We each put a lot of work into it, and and there's positives and negatives to working with a giant group. Positives, obviously, you get to a lot of division of labor. You don't have to do everything yourself. There's a lot of opinions, but that can also be a negative. Sometimes, 14 people, 14 voices. But I think we did a really good job kind of getting through all of that and making this a project that we're all proud of.
Awesome. And which essay specifically did you work on?
Yeah, I worked on the War Overseas section, or the War Overseas essay, and more specifically, I looked at the tactics of basically the Western Front, so how that changed from 1914 to 1918, and how obviously the war in the trenches evolved, and why that ended towards the middle of 1918 and basically to the end of the war.
I'm curious, Dominik. The letters in question in the book, were they being sent between the brothers overseas, or were they being sent back and forth?
Most of them were sent back and forth. So we have a lot of letters from Frank Leonard, their dad, obviously to the sons, mainly dealing with actually the business, because the business was a joint venture. Their sons were very much part of it, even during the war. So that never stopped. Most of his letters, actually, I transcribed a lot of the letters that Frank sent to his sons, and a lot of these basic business letters. Should we do this expansion? Should we make these many shells? Or and asking his opinion or their opinions. But we also do have, I think there are a few letters between the brothers, but they very often fought close enough to each other that they could just travel to visit each other and discuss the letters. So a lot of letters will say something like, went to go see Woodman, we discussed your proposition of such and such date, here's our answer type of idea. But yeah, and there's a few letters from the sister, Alice, but most of them are from Woodman and Ibbotson themselves.
Okay, so that actually provides a very close-up insight into the Canadian soldiers' experience overseas. So what were you guys able to extrapolate from these letters about how the experience of the war was for these two brothers?
Yeah, the brothers are a little bit different than most soldiers. They were both officers, and so they obviously had a few privileges that other soldiers didn't. Out of the two of them, Ibbotson had a little bit of an easier, let's say, wartime experience. You know, he had a few servants. They'd draw him hot baths. He very often had pajamas and got to sleep in a pretty comfy room. Obviously, a stark contrast to what we usually think of as living in the trenches. I think Woodman had it a little bit worse. He was an artillery officer and sometimes spent some time in the trenches, and that came out through the letters. But very often, you know, the stuff we read, especially from Ibbotson, is, you know, I read, you know, this book and I don't think I enjoyed it that much, or I enjoyed it, or, you know, my servant drew me this hot bath and it felt fantastic, that type of thing. So it's quite different than what you would usually think.
So was their status in the military based on their prominence back home, or was it an actual merit system? They
both went to RMC, so Royal Military College, in Kingston. So they were both basically trained as officers, and it was mainly a rank thing. You know, you could be from, at the time, lower classes, and if you obviously went through the military and got to a higher rank, you'd still enjoy these privileges. But World War I did a big changed a lot of the perceptions that we have between, obviously, the nobility always being the officers, especially in England, you know, where a lot of the upper classes were usually the officers. But World War I changed a lot of that, where everyone fought in the trenches, more or less, although officers did find themselves usually in a little bit more comfortable position. But you know, a lot of World War I, their accounts you read is by the time, you know, the soldiers get to the enemy trench, their officers had been killed off because they're the ones that were targeted first. So obviously you have to promote someone, so you promote the lower level soldiers.
Interesting. So between the two brothers, the one who lived kind of lavishly and the one who was an artillery officer, which of the two didn't make it back?
Actually, the artillery officer, Woodman Leonard, didn't make it back. He died at Vimy Ridge. He was shot, and at first they thought he was going to make it, but he took a turn for the worst and ended up dying quite soon after.
Interesting. And just to tie this back to a previous episode of Gradcast that we did you guys look into at all the Christmas kind of laying down the arms during World War I? Was that at all mentioned?
Not really. It didn't come out in the letters whatsoever, at least the letters we have. We're really focusing on the brothers and the tie to local history, especially in London, and what the letters had to tell us. We didn't find anything of mention that they mentioned, at least. So we didn't look into that specifically, no.
All right, well, I just want to bring it back to you a little bit more as opposed to the research. I know that you volunteered at the Royal Canadian Regiment Museum.
Yep.
And you're actually involved in the grand reopening back in 2013. Absolutely. And I'm just curious, what was that all about?
So the museum underwent, obviously, a big stage of renovation and expansion. So they about doubled in size between, I think, about 2011 or 2010 to 2013. Big renovations were happening at that time. A lot of money came in, and they got to change a lot of the stuff, especially in, I don't know if you're familiar with the building itself, Wolseley Barracks, the kind of big U-shaped military building. So one of the whole sides now is actually dedicated to the museum. And so, you know, instead of having it kind of squished into a small space, they decided to obviously expand it and help out with the interpretive process. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. You know, you get to meet a lot of interesting people, especially in the kind of, you know, the curatorial and museum field, as well as the military field. You know, a lot of officials still are at the barracks. One of the battalions is still present. So especially for the grand reopening, you know, there were museum officials as well as military officials from more or less actually across Ontario coming to see the finished project.
Do you by any chance work at the desk?
I do.
Did I by any chance meet you in the summer of 2013?
You very likely did. Yeah, I've been there for a few years. I'm still there now, and actually I'll be doing my internship there starting in May for a few months.
Because I remember wandering in the summertime, like no one was there.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to the guy at the front, and it might have been you.
Yeah, very likely was. Yeah, I'm at the front desk most of the time, especially during the school year because I have a lot less time to actually do other stuff. But I do give tours very often. You know, once in a while when people need help, I'll be at the cache. But it's usually during the summer that I get to do a lot more of the more curatorial stuff. The curator there, Georgiana Stanchi, was amazing at letting me kind of try out all kinds of different things and see where my interests lie. And I think I'm leaning more towards the kind of collections management aspect. Like I was saying earlier, I like dealing with physical things.
So that's your plan then when you finish your MA, is to go into curation?
Yeah, so when the MA finishes, we have the third term, which is during the summer. It's a summer internship, so each one of us finds a different position wherever. So, a lot of people stay in Ontario, but that's not exclusive. One of my friends is going out to BC, for example, so there's quite a range of where you can go. A couple of people are looking into going to Texas, too. And after that, yeah, I think I'll stick to kind of trying to get something in that field. At this time, it seems that there's not a lot of jobs out there, so it'll be a little bit difficult. But hopefully, I can find something here in London that'll satisfy my need for physical things. So,
just for everybody out there, because I know myself, for example, anytime I've gone to a museum, I've never once stopped and thought to myself what exactly the museum curator does. So I was just wondering if you might be able to explain it to us for myself and everybody out there that doesn't really know.
Yeah, it's quite a range of a job. It really depends on the museum itself. I mean, sometimes a curator is a very administrative person, really doesn't have that much to do with the day-to-day operations, so very much a CEO almost. But in some museums, the curator does everything, really. For example, that's more or less the case at the RCR, with an exception now. We kind of took on more people now, but at a certain time, the curator there was doing everything from choosing what object we're going to be put on display, what kind of display cases, even down to the labels that we're going to use, and everything in between. A lot of the times, they're also the public face to the museum. The curator as being kind of the person in charge, obviously responsible for the entire operation. A lot of times they lead the educational programs. And again, it really depends on the museum. So for example, at a place like the ROM, a huge institution, the curator is not going to have time to do that type of thing. But at smaller institutions, there's definitely more leeway to be more part of the community and deal with the community and the visitors directly. So.
All right. Well, another thing I'm a little bit curious about. This is a strand of history that people don't often consider, like I was just saying. And I want you to tell me why it's important to you that this stuff exists, that museums display these artifacts, and that people can actually have physical access to the past. Yeah.
It's actually, it's a question that we grapple with even nowadays. I mean, how much importance do we put in these physical objects, and are they really necessary? At the same time, I really think they are. We recently had a guest lecturer come in for our museology class who was saying that, a lot of times, especially at Fanshawe Pioneer Village, for example, when a family goes out with their grandmother, for example, and she notices something in the museum and sees, oh, I used to use this, I used to be able to know how to use it, and they explain it to their kids and so on, and it becomes a family matter. You can learn about your history, your family, not just through reading a label or reading something off of a screen or something like that, or watching a show, but it's your family member here saying, I used to use this, and remembers it and passes on the knowledge to their children or their grandchildren and so on and so forth. So I think it's important because it ties us back to our past in more ways than one. I think oftentimes we need that. It's not something, a lot of times people, say, there's no future without the past and stuff like that. And, although that's very simplistic, I think it's true in many ways that, I don't think looking forward is the only way. I think we have to look back oftentimes to be able to know what to do in the future.
So aside from the book that you guys are working on right now, what other kind of research is going on in the department? Yeah, so like I said, the first term we did the Built Heritage Project, so assessing the houses. Second term right now, it's mainly we've been dealing with the book, but we have a project later, which we kind of call the Twitter Project. So what we do is we look at, we're each assigned about a month during World War I. So I think I was assigned May of 1915. And we look at the archival records from the London Free Press, and we look at their headlines, and we tweet that on the day 100 years later. So in 2015 now we're going to be tweeting stuff that happened 100 years ago, but it was happening in London during the war. So it's a way, again, to connect to the community, local history, what was going on in London, obviously a very different time from nowadays. For museology class, for example, we're putting on a display of rural medicine at the turn of the century. So that's going to be coming up in about 2 weeks. It's going to be up in Lawson Hall, just across from the main offices. So there's kind of a display case there. So again, it's a lot of hands-on stuff. So UWO History Department has quite an extensive collection of kind of the turn of the century medical artifacts. And they're working closely with, again, Fanshawe Pioneer Village to kind of get the stuff we need. So we're focusing a lot on kind of the traveling doctor, the rural doctor who had to go places and the limited amount of tools he had to do his job. So, hopefully that'll come through our display and the objects we chose. So
a lot of the things that you're talking about are really cool. I love the project because, like, as everyone who listens to the show who knows me knows that I do a history as well. I go and sit in the people who read long books and write long papers category of historians. And it's interesting because, like, it's a very friendly attitude, but it's also very weirdly separate because you guys kind of are such a tight-knit community of students. Can you talk a little bit about, I think public history students must collaborate and work together more than most other humanities master students. And I'd be really curious to hear more about the kind of culture that has sprung up in your offices there.
Yeah, I mean, unlike the regular stream historians, a lot of our projects, if not most of them, are collaborative. You do them in groups, you do them in even pairs, it doesn't matter, but there is a group aspect to them. While, the regular stream, you do your research, you write your dissertation, and you do it more or less individually. And it's interesting because, like, you meet as complete strangers, more or less complete strangers. I actually knew a few of the people in the program before from, there's a few Western students in there that I knew from my BA. But, you go there more or less complete strangers, and, you're expected to work with these other 13 people on these giant projects that are going to be, published, and you're going to be presenting to all kinds of different institutions and stuff like that. So, you learn to be very accepting of other people's, especially opinions. There's no room for being judgmental or anything like that. And I think we've done quite a good job of kind of taking 14 opinions and making it something that we can all work with. And I think that's why, it seems to, the other history students that we're such a close-knit group, because we have to be. There's no other way to get through this program without it. So.
Yeah, and another thing I'm really curious about, I know that the program has very contrary. I think, like, I would say that you, Eric, you have, like, the closest thing going on here, is that there's really a high emphasis on the power of being a good history communicator. And I know that your program requires you guys to start a Twitter and a blog in September when you start. Can you go into, like, kind of what you're expected to do with that and, like, what you've learned about being a communicator of history?
Yeah, so like you said, when you start out, you open up a bunch of accounts that you didn't necessarily have. So I opened up a Twitter and a blog right away. I didn't have Twitter before I started this program. What you learn is there's a difference between writing history for academics and writing history for the public. There's a big difference in how you communicate, especially in terms of language and style. Usually the simpler you can make something, the better, but that's not usually the case. But it's often about, to be effective, obviously your message has to go through. So very often what I ended up doing is if I wrote something that was meant for the public, I'd have it read by not my people in the public history program, but by someone else to make sure that they understand and they know what's going on. The blog, for example, was a way, especially in some of our courses that don't have that much writing, to basically be an update as well as kind of a way to get yourself out there. So, for example, one of the stories that our supervisor loves to tell is one of the students from a couple of years ago actually got hired because of the blog. So the work I can't remember if it was he or she, but the work that person was doing and blogging about actually got her hired, or the person hired in the United States. So, there is an avenue there, and a lot of times it's just about really getting your name out there, especially with Twitter. I mean, Twitter's really blown up, and, more or less everyone has it. And, there's a good way to use Twitter even for academic purposes, I think. So a lot of museums, especially nowadays, whether it's social functions or kind of little tidbits. So, for example, the RCR is doing stuff like, like museum secrets. So once in a while they'll tweet something that, maybe you don't know, or something behind the scenes. And I think that's important. Like, people love that kind of stuff, like the behind the scenes look, or the look you don't get usually. So.
Yeah, speaking of which, there's one other really cool thing about the program that I also want to get to ask you about what happens back there is you guys build stuff.
Yeah, we build stuff. And,
you guys build really cool stuff, and you guys are really hands-on on those things. Can you tell me more about, like, what's going on in the building?
Yeah, so a big part of public history, especially nowadays, is the digital aspect. It's getting more and more, obviously, evident that the public history field has to accept, obviously, these trends, whether it's making more interactive exhibits. So that's actually one of the classes, is interactive exhibit design with Bill Turkel, which is a fantastic course if anyone ever has a chance to take it. What you do is, at the beginning of the year, there's a few lectures on basically interactive exhibits and how to build stuff in certain programs and using certain tools, and then you're expected to basically just go on your own and make yourself a project. So a lot of people are doing, for example, one of the projects I can think of is Tamar Cachet is doing a project where you kind of line yourself up with the computer, and it takes a photo of your head, and then it lines you up with like pictures from the past, and then it'll print out the picture, and then on the back of it there'll be a little historical kind of information about the dress that you're wearing, or the the suit that you're wearing, and what it would have been, or what the norms would have been at the time. A lot of people are doing a lot more hands-on stuff. So for example, in the years past, people have done for example, like there's been like a car, and they had this kind of information on. They would drive around and be able to tell you all this kind of different information. So it's just, it's you got to think outside the box, especially with these kinds of exhibits. And the thing I like about the course is that it's meant for you to try different things. And the professor says at the beginning of the year is don't matter if it fails, just try your best, do your best, and at the end of the day, if you at least know why it failed and you tried something that you really wanted and kind of shot for the stars, then that'll be just fine. So.
Classic Turkel.
Yeah, classic Turkel.
All right, I don't mean to keep tossing back to previous questions, but like Tristan was just saying, my program also requires me to start a blog and like Twitter at the beginning of the year when we got here. And I'm just really curious, because when I'm using Twitter, I'm tweeting about covering a story, or that I'm doing this right now, or something like that. You know what I mean? What kind of stuff are you guys blogging about and tweeting about?
A lot of our blogs are, especially with our classes, so you're tweeting about the projects you're doing or what you're thinking about doing. Maybe you get someone to share their opinion with you. Maybe, they think it's a good idea, it's a bad idea, that type of thing. So oftentimes, especially a couple months ago, I was tweeting about the type of interactive exhibit I wanted to make. And, by the time I look back on all the blogs I did, and I ended up with a completely different idea than what I started out with. Tweeting, Personally, I haven't gotten too much into that. You try, and especially with something new, and you don't quite know how to handle it. But a lot of it is, a lot of what I try and do is mainly just stuff that's going on in local history. Sometimes I'll tweet, world events. And for example, one of the latest things that I think I put up there is, there was a unfortunate shooting at the museum in, I think it was Tunisia. So, I think a couple dozen people lost their lives. So, that's obviously something that is becoming more and more prevalent. In the Middle East, there was a story recently where, ISIS had destroyed a whole bunch of statues from how long ago. So, and that's very relevant. This is history that doesn't belong to one country, but everyone, and, it's sad to see it destroyed like that, so.
Okay, and another thing that I was going to ask you about earlier, but I didn't want to interrupt you on a roll. You're originally from Slovakia.
Yes.
And so I'm just curious, how long, you've been in Canada for 8 years, right?
About 8 years,
so
yes.
So you did high school here as well?
I did from grade 10, yes.
Okay, so why the move? What made the decision?
I had actually lived in the United States prior to that for a few years. My dad's job kind of brought us around the world, especially North America. So I had lived in Florida when I was about 4 to about maybe 12, and we moved back home every summer to Slovakia. And then we moved to Toronto for a year, and then that was it. My dad had retired, and we moved back home. And it came time to kind of choose where to go to school. And I had thought that, my English skills were pretty good. I can maybe come back here and try it out, especially with universities and stuff like that. So I came back in grade 10 just because I wanted the high school degree. It's a lot easier getting accepted, obviously, if you have the high school degree from Canada to go to a Canadian university. And that's pretty much where I've been. After grade 10, I didn't think I'd stay. I had a pretty tough grade 10, but ended up making it, and here I am now 9 years later. So.
Inspiring.
Yeah, inspiring.
Thank you, Dominik, so much for coming on the show tonight.
Thank you guys so much.
We've run out of time, but it's been a great interview.
Yeah.
And you guys out there are listening to Gradcast on 94.9 CHRW. Check out our podcast that we do on our off weeks at gradcastradio.ca. And, of course, go talk to Romina and Gradcast Radio on Twitter. Basically, Gradcast Radio leads us to all of the things that we do. You guys have an amazing week, and we will see you guys next time.
Adios.
That's all for this week. If you want to send us some feedback, or if you want to come on the show yourself, email us at gradcastradio@gmail.com. Be sure to hook us up on social media. On Twitter, we're at Gradcast Radio, and look up Gradcast Radio also on Facebook. If you want to subscribe to the podcast is located at gradcast.podbean.com, and it's on iTunes. And while you're there, why don't you leave us a review? It really helps us out. We'll see you guys next week.